The deep rumble of Keanu Reeves' Norton Commando 961 cut through the silent Los Angeles night. The city stretched out around him, bright, restless, alive, but a deep loneliness clung to the streets. He had just left a charity event, but his mind wasn't on the gala or the speeches. It drifted elsewhere, to the past, to memories of long-forgotten moments that still lived within him. He didn't know why, but tonight, he felt the weight of time pressing against his chest. Then he saw her. A lone figure sat curled up against the wall of a closed storefront, wrapped in a tattered blanket. The sight was not uncommon in L.A., but something about this woman made him slow down. Maybe it was her posture, too still, too withdrawn. Or maybe it was instinct. Keanu pulled his bike to the curb and swung his leg over. The woman barely moved, but as he stepped closer, his breath caught in his throat. Even in the dim light, even with the years carved into her face, he knew her. "Mrs. Collins," he whispered. The woman stared, her dull, weary eyes lifting toward him. At first, there was no recognition. Then her lips parted, trembling. "Keanu." Her voice was barely more than a breath. She tried to push herself up, but her knees buckled. Keanu lunged forward, catching her before she could collapse. She was too light, too fragile. He could feel the bones beneath the thin layer of her clothing. His heart pounded with questions, but this wasn't the time for answers. "You're okay," he murmured, steadying her. "I've got you." For a long moment, she just stared at him, as if making sure he was real. Then her body sagged against him, exhausted. Keanu exhaled sharply, realizing the cold truth. She had no one else. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you somewhere warm." She hesitated, but when he tightened his grip in reassurance, she let herself lean on him. He guided her to a small 24-hour cafe nearby, his mind whirling. How had she ended up like this? Mrs. Collins, the woman who had once shaped his love for acting, who had stood in front of a classroom, filled with passion and fire. He still remembered the way her voice carried when she taught. On stage, you never hide. You feel. You live. Now, she was a shadow of that woman. Inside the cafe, warmth wrapped around them. Keanu guided her to a booth, where she sank into the seat, shivering despite the heat. He ordered coffee and something light to eat, watching her closely as she wrapped her hand around the cup. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken words. "You want to ask," she finally murmured, her voice hoarse. Keanu didn't pretend not to understand. "Yeah." She traced the rim of the cup with a trembling finger. "I tried," she whispered. "I really tried." Tears stung his eyes as he leaned forward. "Tell me." She took a deep breath, as if pulling strength from the air itself. "After my husband passed, I lost the house. Bills piled up. I kept looking for teaching jobs, but it was like no one wanted to hire someone my age. One thing led to another, and I ended up here." She gave a hollow chuckle. "Funny, isn't it? I spent my life teaching kids how to dream, but I forgot to hold on to my own." Keanu swallowed hard. He thought back to those days when she had encouraged him, pushed him to believe in himself. And now, here she was, defeated by life's cruel turns. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. "You're not alone." Her eyes flickered with something. Hope, but it was fleeting. Keanu knew he couldn't fix everything in a night, but he could take the first step. "Come on," he said, standing. "I know a place." She hesitated but nodded. They left the cafe, and Keanu drove her to a support center for homeless women. As they reached the entrance, she gripped the door handle but didn't move. "One step at a time," Keanu said gently. She inhaled deeply, then pushed the door open. Weeks passed. Keanu checked in on her often. She started attending therapy, rediscovering pieces of herself. Little by little, she began to heal. Then, one day, Keanu had an idea. He invited her to a small community theater, the kind where dreams were reborn. The moment they walked in, he saw something shift in her expression. The old spark flickered to life. "You tricked me," she muttered, crossing her arms. Keanu grinned. "Some things you only discover along the way." She sighed but smiled. And then, Slowly, she stepped onto the stage. For the first time in years, she was where she belonged. Months later, Keanu returned to that same theater. He took a seat in the back, watching his children rehearse to play. And there, standing in front of them, directing, guiding, teaching, was Mrs. Collins. Stronger, alive. She spotted him and shook her head. "Reeves, you always had a thing for dramatic entrances." He chuckled. "You always had a thing for dramatic monologues." She laughed, a real, full laugh. Then she turned to the kids. "All right, everyone, let's feel those lines." The stage came to life once more. Keanu leaned back, a small smile on his lips. Life doesn't always give second chances. But sometimes, all we need is someone who believes in us. And sometimes, that belief is enough to bring us back to life.